Are we live? There we go. All right. Hello, everyone. It's a very heavy Thursday, and there are people much wiser than me, much closer to things that have already said plenty about what's going on in the world today. So, respectfully, but also out of just, a bit of levity, we're going to kind of just live and be today because it's heavy. But I'm very excited to have our guest today, one of my research fellows from last year, and just a phenomenal human person. And there she is. Let's bring Montea up here. Wrong button. There we go. Because I know how this works, I think. Done this enough times. There we go. Hello.
Hello.
So, for those people tuning in from Montea's side, they're like, who is this person? This is not Montea. Why is she talking? My name is Jason E.C.Wright. I am founder and director at Bernstein Research Society. We are an institute of design research and critical thought. And last year, Montea was one of our research fellows and did a fantastic project around basically archiving food and recipes, and I was incredibly about it, and so was my mother, which is great. So we'll talk about that. But today we're here to dig into the series called Nobody Asked for This. I tend to ask questions of friends and creatives that genuinely don't get a chance to explore or expand on. So that's what I'm doing here. For those of you on the Burnt Sienna side, this is Montea, but I'm going to run through the traditional introductions. Montea says she is an elderly millennial, coming of age. How did you describe being from Manhattan?
Well, I'm not going to do the accent and mortify myself, but I'm from a small town in northern Manhattan. Um, if you're from the East Coast, you may be familiar with it. It's called Harlem. It's a really quaint place,
I,
idyllic.
I love that. I love that description. I also feel weird that I've actually never spent any real time in Harlem, which I'm looking to rectify this August. So we're going to be talking about recommendations and places to go and or avoid. Um, but one of my favorite questions when we do Nobody Asked for This is always starting off with asking someone like what culture they grew up with versus the culture or niche that they identify with now. It may have changed. And this is indicative of one of our early conversations. You said the culture you grew up with is sweet grits, and the culture or niche you identify with now is polenta, which is hilarious and very telling. But we've had a conversation about why I'm not mad at you for like the sweet grits anymore. So we're good. We're good. Jazzy, if you're watching this, New Yorkers get a pass because it was an after school thing. They didn't have any choice. Um, but yeah, you have done a lot of things that I'm incredibly just flabbergasted by. You've lived such an incredible life of just really deep human experiences that you get to kind of like channel into stories and working with others. But like, how do we get to the Montea today? Like, you're CEO of Ghetto Film School, you came up through the program, but like, how do we get to this point? What was it like being in Manhattan, in Harlem, coming of age, and figuring out like what you actually liked and what you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I was in high school, I'd come up in an environment that was very much focused on a like math, science, law, engineering track, and the through line was that you wanted to do long-term planning for a really high-level career. And I just knew early on that none of those tracks were really for me. I got the sense around like early high school that I needed to figure out what I wanted to go long on, and I knew that was going to be something involved in like film or entertainment. And I was really lucky to have a family friend who actually passed me a flyer for Ghetto Film School when it had just started, sort of in its infancy. And so I felt like that was going to be my extracurricular that got me into college. It sort of paved the way for that, and it turned out to be exactly that. And so I'd say that that's sort of the seed of me, being at Ghetto Film School in the capacity that I am now.
And being a part of that program, I'm sure that it informs the way that you approach any student projects now. But like, do you remember the feeling of when you first got the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to create a thing now? Okay, what does this look like, and having that guidance, like how important was that for you to have a space where you feel comfortable to like, oh, let's explore or expand on this idea?
Oh, yeah, I love this question. Have you ever seen that 90s film, Camp Nowhere?
No, I don't think so.
Camp Nowhere is like uh, it's like a JTT film. Remember Jonathan Taylor Thomas?
Oh, okay, got it.
It kind of lives in that universe, and it's about this group of kids who have nothing to do for the summer, and so they sort of hijack an abandoned school bus and they start an unauthorized camp, right, for the summer. And I just remember movies like that and like Blank Check really speaking to a sense of agency the kids want to have over their life and their decisions that I just found to be really addictive as a kid, right? Blank check. What would I do if I was rich and could operate as an adult? Can't nowhere. Like, how would we run it if we were in charge? And when I came to GFS as a high school student, really in a transactional way, looking for extracurriculars, right, that would get me into college, what I found was an environment that really, on a deep level, um, believed in giving students agency, right, over the
Mm,
stories that they were telling, over the filmmaking process, but on a much deeper level, right, it kind of flipped the high school, the traditional public school classroom paradigm of teacher as expert, right, and student as student. And I just was like, I felt like something had been unlocked in me that I wanted more of. And so that really was what I saw in that environment, secondary to filmmaking, that I was like obsessed with.
yeah,
I
and
thought it was rare.
you've said this to me before about how that approach of changing the model of like the student is the there to learn and the teacher is the expert, and flipping that. How did that play into your experience, especially as you were just thinking like, oh, this is something that's going to look good on my resume as I go into college, whatever the case may be. Like, how did that play out? And like, do you have a specific example of like, oh no, like the students could be the experts as well, and the teacher could learn from that? Like, to really dig into what that meant for you at that time.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific example. You know, for GFS has been operating for the last 22 years, right? And every year, uh, we've done something called the International Thesis Project. And the way that works is that we tell the students at the top of the year that by the end of the year, they're going to shoot a film overseas, right, on location in the language of that culture. And when GFS was a small Bronx based community organization with an 8 week program and 15 students, all the way through now, right, where we're operating in 3 cities, um, sizable operating budget. We've done this project every year, right? It has been
Mm,
a mainstay. And I remember that first year that I was a student, our project was set to take place in Mexico City, right? And beyond that, the execution, the A to B, was totally up to us. And I just remember the late nights after school, the exhilaration, the fear about how that project was actually going to come to life. And I remember so many times there are moments where we're trained as students to sort of look to the teacher and say, like, well, what's next, or like where's the part where you really take the reins, and it never came. It really was, up to us to pull it off, which I'd say was the beginning of um, a, a continual demonstration of those values that I observed as a student and then got a chance to really deepen as a staff person.
yeah, and that I have 6 ways I want to frame this next question, because the thing that you and I geek out about a lot is process, right? Like, what is somebody's practice? How do they approach things? You had a project that you shared a deck with me about that was very specific about like, an intersection of food and film, but it was kind of under this greater umbrella of what is somebody's practice? How do you get into a practice that's documented that, whether it's replicable or not, could still be followed? Why is knowing what a practice is or following a practice such an intriguing thing to you? Just to start, like, why is that been something that you've had to focus on in projects, or just a curiosity of yourself? Like, what is it about learning about somebody's practice that really triggers something in your brain?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like the best way to start there. I think I'm most interested in instincts, right? Like if there is trying to think of the best way to say this. There's a long journey in filmmaking between what is in your heart, right, and the story that takes shape, and then its actual journey onto the screen. And so much of that process is having that original idea filtered through uh, execution and instincts, and trying so hard to make sure that there's real fidelity between what starts here and what ends up on the screen. And I'm
Mm,
really interested in sharpening those tools, right, that allow me to say, like, is what's here, right? And like, are the decisions that I'm making to get from A to B the right ones, right? And I think that having any sort of process, habits, rituals, right, for understanding your voice or how you get up in the morning or whatever have you, that kind of repetition sharpens those instincts. And that's something I'm really just fascinated by, right? Like, I'll say something really dumb. I started the year by doing like 10 minutes of yoga every day. And I chose yoga because I hate it. I hate it. It just makes me uncomfortable physically and mentally, right? But I wanted to see if I did the same thing every single day for 10 minutes, what would be the progression of my experience, right? Is it going to get less
hmm.
painful? Am I going to feel more flexible? Am I going to get quieter in my mind? And so, like, it's really, it's not the yoga part is not really relevant, or the 10 minutes. It's just the every day, and then noticing how certain things become instinctual, certain things become more comfortable, new ideas rise to the surface. I think that those kind of tools are like, they're invaluable, right? Cultivating those kind of things within yourself, whether you're like, making a film or learning how to cook or whatever have you.
Yeah, I never really thought about it from the standpoint of like sharpening almost like your own reflexes. Is like how do you like what's that whetstone that you keep coming back to for that? Which keeping on the food side, can you talk a little bit about the project that you did for the fellowship and kind of like the journey that it went through by just having the practice of we're going to meet every Tuesday and we're going to talk through this idea, but like it parallels kind of making film, but it also really digs into what you just talked about with like unpacking a process or a practice and being like, okay, we're going to do this, and oh, now it's this. Like, what was that experience like for you?
Oh man, I really, really, really loved it. Jason, I have to say thank you because I had this idea in my mind for so long, and I wouldn't have gotten anything done without the structure of that, year-long fellowship. So I really appreciate the just the time and space to hash it out.
For sure.
Um, your question and what I wanted to say. Um, So I started maybe like a year before the fellowship with this like vague idea that I wanted to do something that felt like a cookbook, but also a memoir. And I'd been working with a couple of people that I'd met here at Noya House and wanting to think about like what would it look like to make it and how would I get it out into the world. And this whole thing, this kind of like conversation came up around having a platform and an established voice that can get you distribution. And I started to feel like we were getting away from what I really wanted out of it. And so I had to spend a
Right.
lot of time thinking about like what the thing really was and what I wanted. And during the fellowship, I think I'd stewed with it long enough to be able to show up and know that what I wanted to develop wasn't um, content, but more like
Hmm.
a template for other people's content. And so I'm really interested in, I talk about this all the time, like process, right? How do people record their palettes, their family traditions, their histories? How do you preserve those sort of things? And so what was really helpful during the fellowship was getting feedback from you and Diane and Celeste on what it would look like to lay out a tool that would be
Yeah.
part of a family's treasured memories, right? The legacy, or for some people, be the beginning of that.
And I think that my mother found a lot of value in it. I think that the timing of it was great because it was around Thanksgiving time, and she got to like. She still texts me about it. Like, ask your friend if it should be this. Like, mom, it's your whatever you think it is. That's what it is. But like, the fact that she sees you as an authority on how to use it because there was so much passion behind like the intention of what you want, like creating a baseline that people can pour their memories and their things into. That's not too dissimilar from what you were saying about having that fidelity between like as a filmmaker, what's in your heart and what people get. Like not asking for approval, but checking for accuracy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is what you're getting what I had in here? Why is why is working with youth something that's so important to you? And what is your intention for being in these spaces and opening up room for voices that maybe never got the support before? Like, why? is that intentionality important for you?
That's a good question. I came to LA and I didn't really think deeply about working in arts education. I knew I loved GFS, but I found that I really like working with young people. There's a sort of like uh, sense of possibility and a fearlessness, right? That I think
Mm,
is really inspiring. So I just kind of like live off of that energy. But also, I'd spent a lot of time working in advertising, and for I worked with incredibly talented people on really amazing work. But similar to my experience in high school, I liked the intensity and the pace and the volume, but the
right.
subject matter didn't feel like the thing my heart was really tied to. Like, I want to do this type of work. I want the ambition. I want the stakes, right? I want the product, but I don't want it to be a Coke commercial. So I'm really glad that at GFS I've been able to like marry those things.
And talking on the advertising side, like you weren't just flirting with advertising, like you were in a very interesting position with a very large company that was doing like national and international campaigns, but you were in the, was it the archive department?
Mm-hmm.
What is that even like to have access to the references that a major like marketing company is using to basically tell America what it right? It's
Yeah.
like that joke about like, let me go to Twitter and see if I'm mad about this or not, right? It's like when you're making a commercial, what is that archive like? Like, what are people pulling from to inform the commercials they're making? Like, what is that like?
I had so much fun working in that department. I'd say that, like, coming out of film school and not fully understanding how advertising worked, being able to work in that in Widening Kennedy's archive of finished work sold me on the potential of advertising. My job all day was to go through this database and basically watch an infinite number of commercials. I think they had like 30,000 finished pieces, and I was supposed to tag them in this library so that they were more searchable to the agency, right? And so the
Oh,
idea is that someone working on the account team or someone working in planning or other creatives are going to come back and they're going to want to either reference previous work for clients or just go back when they come onto an account and reference the history of the work to get up to speed on like the brand's voice or whatever, right? And so I came in and I saw a lot of uh, Nike in the '90s, Spike Lee, Mars Blackman, Miller High Life with Errol Morris, which is really really
wow.
beautiful work. What else? Sports Center in the '90s, which is like it's just really really fantastic copywriting, and I got so excited about the idea that people come together for these like quick turnaround productions, but the talent and the copywriting and the brand voice is really sophisticated and it's fun and it's like really well executed. And so I just saw sort of um, all the different brand voices that have been built over the last 30 years of the agency. And I was like, who wouldn't want to be a part of this? It was just very cool.
How does that even come across somebody's desk though, right? Because I didn't even know that that was something that, Wyden Kennedy would have, right? Like, it makes sense that you would archive your best projects, of course, because of, legacy or, reference or whatever. But I didn't know that that's a job you could apply for. You know what I mean? So, like, when we talk about the context of people coming into various industries, whether it's film, advertising, television, just narrative, storytelling, was there any, I guess, reference point, whether it was in film school or otherwise, that told you that that was a job you could go for? Or, like, how did you end up in that role? Like, how did you find out about that being a career path?
Oh, I just sort of showed up. I'd gotten connected to that internship through GFS. And I originally worked in a production department. So I was assisting producers who were working on commercial jobs. And then I transferred
Mm,
to the Portland office. And that was where, I was placed, right? But at that point, like, I don't really know anything about how advertising works as an industry, right? I'm just
yeah.
like literally, what is it? We do it again. I'm just happy to be here. Coming to
Oh,
America.
I'm very happy to be here.
That was yeah. I was just happy to be there.
Right. It was funny. I was talking to, I had a call earlier and was talking about like the importance of like directories or like things that kind of demystify like the credits. Like that's one of my big things is living in Los Angeles, having friends that work within the film and television space, and being like, cool. All those long credits that run at the end, what's that? What is a best boy? What is a grip? Like, what are these jobs? Because that used to be the part that people would walk out of a movie on before, Marvel film made people stay after for, different things. But like people were walking out on those things, but those were the things that like literally gave credit and showed you what a small business making a film actually is. Were those things that you already knew about or were curious about before coming into studying film, or was it something that you learned kind of on the fly, like being on different projects and things of that nature, as far as knowing what each of the roles are?
Oh, well, film schools, GFS and, universities usually work around a circuit production model, right? So
Okay.
if I'm directing a project, my classmates are going to be in my crew. And when my classmate is directing, I'm going to be on their crew. And that's where your understanding, at least in a like
Oh,
short filmmaking context, your understanding of crew really works. Now, as you get into professional context, the scale of those crews grow, and underneath department heads, you're getting more and more people and more specialized roles. You're getting
right.
into really complex post production, which has its own workflow and sort of cast of characters. And so, coming out of film school, I knew what the general crew and cast of characters were. You move into advertising, you need to see it in a little bit of a different context.
So, is there a parallel between the prep work that will be required to do a shoot for an advert or a commercial and doing a short film? Like, is it the same track of storyboarding and location scouting or whatever? Or is there a significant difference between those things? Like, is it different between the way that you approach a commercial versus the way you approach a short film?
Yeah, I mean, a commercial is a short film. I think what's added on in commercial advertising context is just walking a client through the process of approving the storyline, getting them on board with the entire thing.
Got it. So, in that context, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around it. In a commercial context, the client would be, I guess, the executive producer or whatever, like the person that like approves something or just funds it, versus the short film being more from the story or ideas of the director. Like that was my understanding of it. Is it that, or am I off?
Well, an agency is going to act sort of as a middleman, right? And so they're going to create
Mm,
the concept for a campaign, and they're going to say, as part of the campaign, we're going to deliver, X number of commercials, right? This is just like a really oversimplification. Now, the client is paying for that, right? The agency is creating this campaign for the client's product. But
okay,
when it's time to actually make the commercial, they're going to hire a production company, and that's where your director is going to come in. That's when those folks are really going to take the campaign idea and bring it to life in the form of a commercial. But as a middleman, the agency is saying, this is what the director wants to do. How do you guys feel about it? Does it really reflect the campaign we've agreed on? So on and so forth. So they're kind of like
got it,
three levels of communication.
got it. So knowing that and knowing those, like having that background of being in GFS, but also working on the advertising side and understanding, the stakeholders or the people whose visions are being brought to life. How inspired do you get when you get a student that is like, you know what, I think I got this, and they take it off and show you something that like you're like, oh wow, I didn't know we could do that. Like, how often does that like moment of inspiration happen where students just totally wow you, and not only how well they got it, but how far they took it?
Yeah, totally. All the time. Nico, if you're on this call, raise your hand. I worked on a project with Media Arts Lab at Apple. They commissioned our students to make 30-second commercials for the iPhone Shot on 12 campaign. And, that
Mm.
was a scenario in which the students were really placed in a position of creative leadership, but the ideas that they put forward and the execution was ambitious in a way that was incredibly inspiring.
That's wonderful. I love that. Also, shout out to any other students that are on here. I know that there's people that have been popping in and waving. I think you're a very popular person today, which is nice.
Well, I just think that some of them are surprised that I'm actually on the internet.
And there's that part too. There's
Right.
that part
I
too.
think they're like, this can't really be her.
Is this a real thing? Like,
Right.
um, when we talk about those things, right? How different is the GFS process for research and preparing for client work or student projects from the way it is in the real world? Is it the same? Do you try to parallel it, or is there some deeper nuance to the approach that GFS takes?
Ideally, they're one to one or as close as possible, right? So if we're looking at um, GFS as an educational experience in a training program, it should be as close as possible. In that sense, some of our curriculum does involve client work. So we were doing a program, we still are with Wieden and Kennedy, called Industry 101, in which the
Hmm,
students walk through the creation of speculative commercials for agency clients, right? And so they're going to learn from the agency team about the commercial advertising workflow, and then they're going to walk through it as a part of their course. And those students and those teams will shoot spec commercials.
got it.
It's a
And
little
you also,
different. Um,
yeah, it is a little different. But there's also other things like, we work together on a few other projects for, you know, things that GFS has done. But you have like these parallels where some of these films or some of these projects live in the real world. They're not only digital, right? Like they're being screened in certain spaces. Can you talk a little bit about some of the places that you've been able to broker or have GFS content like actually presented to the public where they can come see it on a regular basis?
yeah, one of my favorite GFS projects at the moment is a collaboration with the Huntington Library and Gardens. They are renowned for their portraiture collection and their collection of early American art. And every year we have the students take a spring course in which the curators walk the students through the portraiture and earlier American galleries and talk to them about, not just what's in the galleries, but how the Huntington as an institution has amassed such an incredible collection, right? And in
Yeah.
response, the students all shoot 16 millimeter self portraits. They're thinking deeply about composition and history and their own lives. And it's also a really fun course because the students shoot on film, right? Like, we're really proud to say that not only are we a nonprofit film school that is completely free, right? We don't charge tuition, we provide lunch and transportation. We also are really invested in shooting on film.
Yeah.
And so the students make those projects every year. And, for the last 2 years, they've been screened in the galleries at the Huntington. So if you're in Los Angeles, head out to Pasadena in the Virginia Scottsdale Gallery. You will see Ghetto Film School work on view.
I'm excited because I get to go catch up with Ely on Monday, and we're
That's right.
taking a field trip of people there on Saturday. So, Burnt Sienna followers, yes, next Saturday we're going to the Huntington pull up. We'll be there. The details to come. Um, this context is really like I love digging into this. The context that I wanted to kind of like tie off with this part before talking about more structural standards is yourself. You are kind of the poster person for what Ghetto Film School can really do and fulfill, right? Like you started as a student, came through it, came back as an administrator, and now you are the CEO. That's a circularity that you don't often see in certain spaces. You really don't see it a lot in nonprofit spaces. Sometimes you see it, but a lot of times it's always like a larger benefactor or somebody that comes from a specific background or whatever that appeals to the donors. How does that feel for you is it surreal to be in the position that you're in now, or does it feel like a natural evolution of really just living and being an example of what the school's about?
I appreciate compliment. I don't think that I am the poster child. I think that remains to be seen. I think that there
Okay.
are a lot of alum coming up through our ranks in all three cities that are still building the trajectories that will exemplify that. And in a larger sense, I think you're right. But when we talk internally about what the future looks like, we want to be we want that shout out in the Oscar acceptance speech, right? But like
There.
that really is the goal, and that's not to downplay all the other opportunities that come from a GFS experience, mine included. But I wouldn't call myself poster child. I think it feels normal, right? We've been preparing for this for quite some time. I
Mm.
always sort of knew that I was interested in. I don't want to say like leadership in like a sort of like jargony way, but
Yeah.
I really love Ghetto Film School, and so when I arrived, I kind of looked around and I was like, I want all of this. I just pour it on,
Just
on
give
me.
it to me. I also love you are very well practiced in your diplomacy. I appreciate that. But another thing that you are is you're very specific and not shy with your words when you see something that needs to be fixed or amended or whatever. Never without like some solution to recommend, but you're very much so like, hey, no, not this, potentially this, let's do this, like much more decisive. What are some things that you've come up against, like standards or norms, or this is the way we're supposed to do this, and you're like, no, that you've come up against and had to kind of overcome in your time, whether as a student at GFS or on the other side of it, whether you're going to bat for students and their ideas or going to bat for your own or coming up against things with donors or whatever the case may be. Like, what are some old ways of thinking that you've really like kind of bumped up against in your time that stick out to you?
I think there's a commonly used phrase. What is it? It's sorry, I'm trying to get it right. It's something to the effect of like, this isn't how we've done things so far, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like, this isn't how we've done it in the past. That I think I realized at a certain point is a it's a it's like a fake boundary. It's actually like it's completely meaningless, right? And I think that it can be used tactfully to create a sort of like a, if you know to jump over this hurdle, then you're free. But if you don't, then this is where you're going to stop. And I sort of see, I see comments like that in that same vein, right? Like for
Yeah.
me, that statement means nothing, but you kind of have to know that it's like it's a fake boulder.
Yeah, it's like a test we're gonna see, but also if you let us, we will maintain our status quo. Like,
I think it was the 20th century philosopher Nelly who once said, "I'm just kidding, unless you're going to do it." I don't know, maybe.
I am swallowing the biggest laugh right now. This is reason 37,506 why we're friends. It also reminds me of an interesting fact I learned, or heard, I won't say learned, when I went to visit the zoo in San Diego, which was apparently giraffes are afraid of heights. They will not step over anything taller than like 3 feet. But if you kind of think about it, they also don't kneel when giving birth. So you're born into this world careening to the ground from about 6 feet up. You're probably, and also you live with your head, you're probably afraid of everything. But like you said, it's a fake because your legs could just step over it easily if you know that that's not a real thing. And that's kind of the almost insidious nature of whether you want to talk about, systemic racism or prejudices, means of doing like we've always done it this way is like one of the worst things for anybody to say is like that doesn't mean it's right. And there is also room for things to be interpreted differently, right? One of the quotes that came across my like I think Twitter feed years ago when I was a parent of a 2-year old daughter was like, do not raise your children as you were raised, for they were born for a different time. And it really made me think about how do you untangle the way you were brought up from the way that someone else should be allowed to grow. That changing something for someone else doesn't change your past, doesn't like, inflicting your things on that. So understanding that there's room for interpretation, you can learn from your students, you can learn from your kids, you can learn from, your neighbor's, nephew that plays, video games all the time on how to set up your webcam or how to use the, like anyone that has more experience than you, there's room for you to take that interpretation into account. What are some things that you hope that the students and alum from GFS take and interpret on their own?
I think it's important to develop your own system of making decisions. When I look across a particular class of GFS students, I'd say that there are always students that need to come to conclusions by comparing things, right?
You
Getting
said by
together a
comparing things?
yeah, they rely on comps in order to narrow things down.
Got it.
I think that there are also people who need to start from a blank slate. right? And start
Mm.
from the simplest unit of an idea and then sort of build from there. I'd say that what I'd hope is that folks get in touch with what that is for them, and then like like rigorously build it, right? Like build your instincts around that, and that they know that that in of itself is a choice and an opportunity to like sharpen your instincts.
Do you think it's
You get to
hard for,
decide how you think about things.
right? Do you think it's hard for people to trust themselves or their own decisions when they're in an academic setting?
I think traditionally, and listen, I mean, like a lot of knowledge has been created through traditional classroom settings. So like, I'm not talking shit about like Aristotle, right? Like I get it,
I mean, listen, it's 2022. We're gonna air everybody out. It's fine.
but I think the easiest way to teach is to set up an expert and a pupil. I think that's the easiest way to sort of transfer knowledge, right? It's
Hmm.
just it's not the only way. But you know,
Yeah.
I also just like I really believe in the way that we do things, but I don't think it's the only way.
And I think that there's something to be said about what you said at the beginning, which is, having a practice being a way of, sharpening, almost maybe it is just sharpening your trust in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
finding out where your limitations are and where your strength is being built. Where it's like, oh, when I first did this, wasn't able to do that. Now, look at me, reaching all the way down, or look at me, pitching something by myself or directing a shot that I didn't think that I had the words for, or whatever the case may be in that instance. But that interpretation of giving someone room to learn how to trust themselves have always been my favorite learning spaces, whether I'm in the teacher's standpoint or in the student standpoint. Like that education comes from what's the saying? If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. There's something to be said about like you really have to understand something to be able to teach it across the board. But then also, the more that you understand, sometimes the better you can learn, right? Like, what did Toni Morrison say? Reading made her a better writer, and writing made her a better reader. Those are all very real things. I may be misattributing that Toni Morrison. Please don't come for me, y'all. I'm sorry. But the premise, right? Like that interpretation of making sure that one hand washes the other, one practice helps sharpen, your intuition. I'm always fascinated with how people find not their own voice, but the confidence in the voice that they have, not the achievement of getting the voice that they wanted. You know what I'm saying? Because that's very different. It's very, very different. Um, I have one more question from, I think, just a general standpoint of how you look at storytelling through visual film. Um, why do you think that that's such a visceral way of consuming stories, like to where people really like get it and take hold to it? We've had folk tales that have been told through oral traditions and through plays and Broadway and through books throughout time, but for whatever reason, cinematic storytelling tends to be a way that, like, whether it's animated or just documentaries or films, people tend to really take to messages that are portrayed that way. Do you think it's a cognitive dissonance between like being a viewer and watching something and taking what you want from it? Or do you think that it's something greater as somebody that's seen so many different projects come to life? What do you think is the appeal of almost like learning by watching someone else's experiences through film? Why is film the medium that people tend to take to?
I think it simulates reality, right, in a way that feels um, maybe close to our own experience. I don't know that it's the best way, right? I think there's technology that does that better. I think there's newer technology that does that better. Um, I've had some pretty compelling VR experiences, but I also think, Kian, who was talking about how much he loves music the other day because it forces your mind to generate that imagery without a prompt, right? And I think that's really awesome also. Um, I was joking with a friend this morning in the kitchen that like it's kind of insane to make films, right? Simulating reality on that level that like there are people that are pretending to be in a different situation than they are, right? We're organizing lights and camera and like editing to make you feel like you're watching something that's really happening. And you know, the kind of work that you need to do to get past any walking and talking human beings' ability to spot a fake is really hard, right? And if
Mm.
all for the moment where someone goes, "Oh, I relate," or "That's so funny," or "That's so painful," it's kind of like an insane pursuit, right? Um, but I think that it, you know, people want to see like what looks and feels like real life. They want to see simulations, variations on it, right? Like they want to be able to
Yeah.
tap into their own experience. But I don't know that it's
Hmm.
I don't know that it, like I don't know that visual storytelling has like a corner on that.
I like Ken's thought on, why music was the vehicle, and it was like, oh, this is the thing that makes me like I have to use my brain to that. For me, that's what reading was, is why I think there's always that argument of the book was better because in your brain you created, like, you had the special effects budget, and so anything that doesn't match what was in your head is whack. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And you have like however many people that read that have all of these different references based on whatever they saw where they were growing up, and they imagined is this type of tree versus it. Like, people will argue about a tree, and I think that's such a fascinating way of kind of like telling where your reference points are, is by having to be forced to put it together yourself. But I wonder, and again, I'm not saying this as like, film has that corner, but I do find that the conversations that I have, a lot of people reference things in films as a shorthand for explaining deeper emotions, for explaining different references. But also, I think about people reference songs and books for that too. So it's not just film. So maybe this is just a me thing as I'm talking this through. Like, I watch films and it's because my dreams are very observant, right? Like, I'm like in it, but I'm also observing it, which is a weird thing. And I'm always waking up like, who approved this production budget? But watching films is almost like watching the dreams of other people. But it's the same reason I love design personally, because everything we're living in was somebody's imagination. The table that you're sitting at, the chair I'm sitting on, the lighting, like all these were in somebody's, right? The phone we're using wireless internet, like this was all somebody's idea, right? But the courage, or maybe even the foolishness of putting it out into the world and being like, oh, what's the worst that could happen? How hard could it be? Allows other people to benefit from it. And that's what I take away from the stories you told me about students and just watching your journey of just living, is really whatever the worst that can happen is, you'll deal with it, but also is there room for, but what's the best that can happen? And I appreciate the hopefulness that comes in there. So thank you for just sharing ideas at will, because having someone that you can talk to about what they see in the world, that's not always like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that. What about this? Or like giving like not an opposing opinion for the sake of being antagonistic, but really being like, that's not my experience. Here's how I arrived at this particular thing. Um, I really value people that are able to share references, even if they can't articulate it verbally, but having like photo references or a film or a song or whatever, to be able to say, no, I actually have a different experience, and have the confidence to be, kind of going against the grain in that is fantastic, because it gives other people room to say, well, you know what, actually, I don't think the same way, and it just like it's this wonderful, more honest conversation of things, and it's one of the reasons why I'll forever sing your praises of your abilities to do what you're doing. So you may not consider yourself a poster child, but from the outside, I believe that you're doing an amazing job of just stewarding the experiences that are new, not even trying to replicate your own, but making space for the new ones and being open to learn from that. And I'm grateful to see that as an example. So I think that wraps up my questions. What would you like to share with people to leave them with, whether it's a final thought, shameless plugs and advertisements, shout out students, tell people where they can donate, like all of the things, like run it down. Like what should people know?
Yeah, if you want to donate, you can go to www.ghettofilm.org, hit the donate page. Um, Also, if you're ever going to have sweet grits, you need to have them in a styrofoam cup with a styrofoam spoon, and it needs to be refined white sugar. Okay? And you need to be outside in the cold on your way home, hurrying to get them down your throat, but they're a little too hot.
Because this is a very specific childhood reference from what place in New York? Where was this?
Oh, a small town called Harlem.
And what's the name of the diner?
Pan Pan.
Okay. So that everyone that knows me understands why I'm allowing such descriptionary foolishness happening about sweet grits. This is where it comes from. All New Yorkers get a pass now. Cool.
Pan Pan or Sylvia's.
It's a childhood memory. I can't fault you for that. It's fine. I disagree, but I won't fault you for it. It's fine. The sweet grits and savory grits is a debate as old as I can't say time and I can't say America, but it's old. It's been there for a while, and it's
That's right.
joyful.
That's right.
Um,
Jason, thank you. This was really,
Thank you
really
so
great.
much. The next thing for Burnt Sienna is we will be outside of the Disney Concert Hall on Saturday. We'll be doing the Burnt Sienna reading rooms once more. So if you missed us last weekend, you'll be able to come pull up. I'll be there from 12 to 3 on Saturday in front of Sip and Saunders Coffee Outpost right there in front of the concert hall. So come say hi, grab a coffee or a tea, sit with a book, hang out with me. It'll be fun. Field research trips next Saturday to the Huntington Library and Gardens. All details will be on the page. And if you would like to learn more about all of the things that Burnt Sienna does, you can go to our website at burntsienna.org. We do educational programming like this particular series here. We do Nobody Asked for This. We also do Show and Tell, which is our art book club, getting people to take their design books and actually open them up, find the references. And we're going to be introducing a certification course to get you as a freelancer or independent designer or certify your teams in the Burnt Sienna standards for doing responsible research and designing whatever you're making. Have a lot of things coming this year. Looking forward to it. But in the meantime, this was Montea Robinson, CEO of Ghetto Film School. I am Jason E.C.Wright, founder director of Burnt Sienna Research Society, and we will see you next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Have a great one.